Kennedy's rolling out the Save America Act, and he says it's about as straightforward as sweet tea. Show your proof of citizenship to register, flash an ID to vote in federal elections. Sounds simple, right? Kennedy swears it'll help folks trust that only actual citizens are picking our leaders. Now here's where it gets saucy. Instead of wrangling for 60 votes, Kennedy wants to slip the bill through using budget reconciliation, meaning he'd only need 51. And if you think that's a legal tightrope, you're not alone. He's called on Congress's smart lawyers to make it work. Not everyone's sold, even in his own party, but Kennedy's digging in. He's on the Senate floor, cracking jokes and doubling down. His message? I ain't quitting. Whether you agree or not, you gotta admit.
Mr. President, I would like to talk for a few minutes about the SAVE Act. I'm a co-sponsor. I support it unconditionally. The SAVE Act, as you well know, Mr. President, is really pretty simple. It's about our sanctity of voting in America. It says if you want to register to vote in America, you have to prove that you're a citizen of America. And once you're registered, it says when you're voting in a federal election, in all instances, you have to prove you are who you say you are in order to vote. Very simple. Now, there are other provisions that may or may not be added by amendment, but those are the guts of the SAVE Act. Many, I hope not all, but many of my Democratic friends in the Senate are opposed to the SAVE Act. They say that we're setting our time on fire here in the Senate. We're just wasting the Senate's time. We're wasting precious floor time. Many of my Democratic friends say that we should read the law, that the law provides very clearly that, and has since God was a baby, that in order to vote in America, you have to be a citizen of America. My friends on the other side of the aisle have come up with this deeply weird theory that somehow this legislation punishes women in America. Because some women, not all, but some women take their spouse's name when they get married, and that somehow will, as if the women of America are not smart enough to figure it out, that somehow will impede their ability to register to vote and to vote. I don't get that part, but I hear my colleagues. My Democratic friends say that this bill is unnecessary, but it's also going to cost money, and that what we're doing in proposing it is we're wasting taxpayer money. We're taking a Great Dane-sized whiz down the leg of every taxpayer in America. And I could go on. I hear them. My Democratic friends have no claim to a high horse. Let me just say that. We wouldn't be here today passing this legislation if some of my Democratic friends had stood up to the Biden administration. But I want to make it clear, I hear my colleagues, I think they're wrong, but they're entitled to their opinion. Now let me explain what this bill is really all about. I'm not going to talk about the details of the bill. I think enough people have done that much more eloquently than I probably could. I want to tell you what this bill is about. It's about people trusting elections in America. And it's about immigration. Now, I happen to believe, and I think most Americans agree with me, that the United States of America is star-spangled awesome. I think this country is the greatest country in all of human history. I think the whole world knows it. When, Mr. President, did you last hear of somebody trying to sneak into China? The whole world wants to come to America. I consider that to be a compliment. And we have a way of welcoming them to America. It's called legal immigration. Is our legal immigration system a modicum, rather a model of efficiency? No. We need to make some changes. And maybe, hopefully, someday we will. But it works, and I'll tell you why it works. Over 1 million of our world's neighbors every year become American citizens. Nigerian doctors, Romanian plumbers, over 1 million Americans, more than any other country, we welcome to become American citizens. Now, the opposite of legal immigration is illegal immigration. Illegal immigration is illegal. Duh. We have laws against it. If you don't like them, you should change them. Our immigration statutes are not some second-tier laws that you can violate without consequence. They're the law. And I support their enforcement. And so do the vast majority of Americans. Now, how you enforce them matters. Our immigration laws should be enforced respecting human dignity. Our immigration laws should be enforced in accordance with due process. Our immigration laws should be enforced in accordance with equal protection and with the standards of reasonable suspicion clearly set forth in, I think it was 1969, a Supreme Court case called Terry v. Ohio. We should follow the law in enforcing our immigration laws. You have the right to protest. You don't have the right to protest violently. In fact, as I've said before, violence undermines the morality that the protesters say their movement is based upon. That's not an original idea. Dr. King knew that. Gandhi knew that. Mandela knew that. Violence is also dangerous. You can get hurt. And it's been my experience that most cops, and members of ICE are cops, most cops will leave you alone unless you do illegal stuff. Their job is to enforce the law. So protest all you want to, but don't do it violently. It is not going to end well. Now some have suggested that the American people are xenophobic and that they're racist when it comes to immigration. These people suggest that vetting people at the border is racist. I think it's prudent, and I think most Americans think it's prudent. Let me see if I can explain why. If I could ask these folks to keep this door shut for 10 seconds, please. Thank you. Most Americans, I read this somewhere once, most Americans look at the southern border like they look at the front door of their home. Most Americans lock their front door at night. Why do they do that? They don't lock their front door at night because they hate everybody on the outside. They lock their front door at night because they love the people on the inside. And they lock their front door because they want to know who's coming into and out of their home. And that's the way people look at the southern border. They don't hate everybody that wants to come into America. In fact, we welcome 1 million of them, but they want to know who they are. They want folks properly vetted. That's why we have immigration laws. Now, remember a few minutes ago, I said my Democratic colleagues had no claim to a high horse? Let me explain why. When President Biden was president, and by the way, I wish him well in retirement. I hope he's doing well. He's had some illnesses, cancer. I wish him well in his retirement and in his health. But when President Biden was president, either he or some of his advisors who had authority on his behalf admitted into our country millions of folks illegally from all over the world. We don't know how many, 8 million, 12 million. Some people say 30 million. I don't know how many. But President Biden, it was like the Price is Right. Come on down. You don't have to follow our immigration laws. Just come on in. Now, I don't really know who was running President Biden's immigration program. I really don't. But I know this. They were one or two things. They were either so incompetent you wouldn't put them in charge of a ham sandwich, or they believed in open borders. I think they believed in open borders. And many of my Democratic colleagues who knew better, they did not say a word. And as a result, we have millions of people in our country. We don't know who they are, but we know they're in our country illegally. And a lot of Americans are opposed to that. It's one of the reasons, I think, that Vice President Harris lost the election. Why do most Americans oppose that? Well, first, as I told you, most Americans believe in the rule of law. They understand that illegal immigration is illegal. Most Americans think it's prudent, not racist, it's prudent to vet people at the border. Most Americans understand that if you want to come to our country legally, we have a process, and that it's unfair to people who have been waiting patiently in line to be properly vetted to allow anybody who can get across the border to jump the line. Most people understand that in America, understand that viscerally. And many Americans, let's just put it on the table, Mr. President. Let's just put it down there where the goats can get it. Most Americans, nope, strike that. Many Americans believe that this was a plot. It was intentional by President Biden and some of my Democratic friends to admit people illegally into America so that perhaps at some point these folks would be indebted to the Democrats and would vote for them. I'm not saying that's true, but you've been smoking a doobie if you don't think that a lot of Americans don't believe that. They believe this was intentional. Again, I'm not saying it's true. And when we pointed out many members of the press go catatonic and foam at the mouth and say you can't say that. But they're living in La La Land. A lot of Americans believe that. And a lot of Americans believe, whether it's accurate or not, that these folks vote today and that they undermine the sanctity of our elections. So that's what the SAVE Act is about. It's about trying to get the American people to trust our elections every year in light of the fact that President Biden and his team, with the concurrence of many of my colleagues in this chamber, admitted millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people into our country illegally. I'm not saying they were all bad people. I think many of the folks who came into our country were economic migrants. They just wanted a better life. That's why we have illegal immigration. Not all of them were Cinderella. There were a lot of criminals. There were a lot of murderers. There were a lot of sex traffickers. There were a lot of drug dealers. There were. We're trying to catch them now. But I guess the larger point is we don't know who the hell they were. Because once again, Price is right. Come on down. And so that's what this bill is meant to do. It's meant to say to the American people, look, we in Congress hear you. We want you to trust our elections. My personal feeling about getting people to trust our elections, I think if we did two things, I'm supporting this bill, but I think we ought to do two things. Number one, have a rule that says you have to prove you are who you say you are in order to vote, and I guess I would add to that in order to register to vote. And number two, we need to go back to having an election day, not election month. Because when it takes longer than just an election day, people think the worst. But the SAVE Act will help as well to restoring trust in the American system. Because you know what? Our democracy can't stand if people don't believe in the sanctity of folks that we put in charge to administer that democracy. Now, let me say one last thing, Mr. President. You know, I'm in the minority on this. The majority of my colleagues on the Republican side, and I feel very confident on my Democratic side, the majority of my colleagues don't agree with me on this. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes the majority just means all the fools are on the same side. Sometimes someone in the minority can be right. That's why we have the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is not for the high school quarterback or the prom queen. The Bill of Rights is for people who see the world a different way, and they have the right to do that. So I'm in the minority on this. I don't know how this bill is going to turn out. I can't predict the future. I have to wait for it like everybody else. But if the SAVE bill doesn't pass, SAVE Act doesn't pass, and we're serious about passing it, and I think we are, Mr. President, I know you are, we need to try to pass this legislation through reconciliation. Now, you know how reconciliation works, Mr. President. It means we can pass this bill with 50 Republican votes and the vice president to break the tie. That's how we pass the one big, beautiful bill. I would hope to get some of my Democratic friends to support us, but we don't have to have them. That's harder than I described because, as you know, Mr. President, there are parameters on reconciliation. Anything you propose through reconciliation has to be paid for. We can find the money to pay for it. And anything you pass through reconciliation has to conform with the contours of the Budget Control Act. We call that giving a provision a bird bath. And our parliamentarian decides what passes muster under the Budget Control Act and what doesn't. Now, we've got a lot of smart lawyers in the United States Senate. Every single one of them thinks they're Oliver Wendell Scalia. But we got a lot of other smart lawyers in America. Here's what I'm getting at. We have yet to try going to these smart lawyers, some in the Senate and some, believe it or not in the Senate, and saying, craft us a SAVE Act that will pass muster under the Budget Control Act and can be blessed by the parliamentarians. And some of my colleagues, those Oliver Wendell Scalia types, they say, Kennedy, you know, that you'll never be able to do that. They don't know. I've been here 10 years. I've seen things pass muster, survive a bird bath that I didn't think had a hope in hell. And I've seen provisions pass the parliamentarians' judgment under a bird bath that I thought, I've seen them not pass that I thought were slam dunks. You don't know till you try. And we haven't tried. And if this bill is as important as everybody says it is, and I think it is, because we're not just talking about voting, we're talking about the confidence, the trust of the American people in our elections. If this bill is as important as we say it is, we should try it through reconciliation. I haven't convinced Senator Thune of that. I haven't convinced all my colleagues on either side of the aisle. But I plan on continuing to chase them like they stole Thanksgiving and Christmas put together. Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate you listening to my explanation of what the SAVE Act. Did I mention I support the SAVE Act? Did I mention I'm a co-sponsor of the SAVE Act? I just wanted to clear that up, Mr. President. And the real reason that we're here today. So I'm done, Mr. President. What would you like me to do? Put us into a quorum call? Yes, sir. Yeah, it's okay with you, Max? Oh, you're not Max, you're Brian. Okay. I suggest the absence of a quorum.